Hi, this is Argonax, and we talk about things that don't matter. Internet Wanderer, I have some breaking news for you. Valve has finally finished a trilogy. That's right, they have finally made a game that has the number 3 in its name. Well, kinda. Sorta. Not really. Maybe? Perhaps? Let me explain. So Valve is a company that has achieved a certain meme status, since they just can't seem to make a third game in any of their franchises. Don't take my word for it, take a look at all these memes right here. Believe me, people are passionate about this company, and they're more passionate about wanting them to make a third game. It doesn't matter which franchise, as long as they do it, I guess. For some, this is well-known information, but for those who are unaware, yes, the video game company Valve, who has made a lot of critically acclaimed video games, has never made a game with a 3 in its title. Half-Life 2, Portal 2, Ricochet 2, Team Fortress 2, Left 4 Dead 2. Hell, there are 2 numbers in that game, and neither of them are 3. There's also the fact that there are 6 Counter-Strike games, with the first one being Counter-Strike, and the 6th one being called Counter-Strike 2. There are 3 Dota games, well, if you include their spin-offs. It's even worse. The expansions for Half-Life 2, that's right, Episode 1 and 2. There was supposed to be a third one, but it never happened. And it gets even worse. Their video game engine, which is the 3rd iteration, by the way, is called Source 2. It's gotten to the point that the man himself, Gaben, the CEO of the company, is memeing about it all the time.
Is this what you've been waiting for? Say 1, 2, and 4.
The line is triple kill. Triple, 3, as in you've killed 3 heroes.
What a gamer. What a god of a gamer, seriously.
I don't understand.
Just say 3. 3 kills, triple, 3 heroes. 3.
This is terrible.
But what's my motivation?
Absolutely terrible.
Your motivation
Nothing
is
about this
3
is
kills. Just give me anything. Anything you want. Say whatever, okay? I don't care.
You've killed more than 2 people and less than 4.
God, I hate this.
Yeah, you know, that's technically right. You nailed it. We're good. We can move on.
I'm not wearing underwear.
So, when I say that Valve has made a third game, yeah, it's kind of a lie, but also not really. It's a third game in spirit, although this might change in the future with Half-Life and these leaks that are getting really juicy, by the way. As their latest release, Deadlock is, in my opinion, the spiritual successor to Dota 2. It does many things that are either an improvement to Dota's mechanics, or it overhauls things that Dota was unable to do due to the game's limitations. And best of all, at least in my view, Deadlock is the first true, fresh entry into the MOBA genre. It could even serve as the blueprint for all new MOBAs moving forward, and who knows? Deadlock's success might even spawn an entirely new subgenre of games. So join me, Internet Wanderer, as I try to break down, in my opinion, what makes Deadlock a worthy successor to Dota, what things it does well and what things it does differently in order to separate itself from its own inspiration, and if you'll allow me, to convince you all that this game is basically Dota 3 in everything but name. Because, you know, Valve still doesn't want to add the stupid number to the name of the game. Never change, Gaben. Hello and welcome, Internet Wanderer. My name is Argonax. I make video reviews, essays, commentaries, and shorts. I hope you enjoy my content enough to do the YouTube things, such as liking and subscribing. And special thanks to all the channel members, to who I am extremely grateful for their support. Their contributions mean the world to me, and it helps keep the channel going. But enough of that, let's get back to the topic at hand. Now, the definition of a spiritual successor is this. I ain't reading all that because, I can't read. But essentially, it's when a game isn't directly connected to another, but it is strongly inspired by a game that preceded it. Usually, a spiritual successor is not in the same series, it's usually not even in the same universe. But the themes, the styles, and the overall vibes are the same as what came before. Books, TV shows, movies, they do this all the time, and video games are no stranger to this either. Many popular and well-known games are actually spiritual successors of another. Rivals of Aether 2, spiritual successor to Smash Melee. BioShock is the successor of System Shock. City Skylines to SimCity. Riot Games' entire catalog, which, let's be honest, it's only really 2, is a spiritual successor to Valve and Blizzard games. Usually, spiritual successors are done by another company or entity as a homage to another game. Spiritual successors from the same company is actually rather rare, with the only ones that come to mind are FromSoft games such as Dark Souls to Elden Ring, or BioWare with the original Baldur's Gate games and Dragon Age Origins. Another example that comes to mind is id Software with the original Doom, and then when they finally made Quake, you could say that that's a spiritual successor. A lesser known example could be with Fail Better Games with the Sunless Skies and the Sunless Seas games. Spiritual successors are everywhere. There's a lot of overlap between what makes a game heavily inspired by something and it becoming a spiritual successor. But usually, spiritual successors don't try to hide their influences. And speaking of influences, Dota itself is a pretty influential game. It pretty much started the entire MOBA genre, which exploded in popularity from the early to mid-2010s. But lately, the MOBA genre has taken a bit of a backseat somewhat, as other competitive games have taken the spotlight. Nowadays, the only 2 big MOBAs out there is really just League of Legends and Dota 2 now. While there are other notable MOBAs out there, none of them really come close to comparing to these 2. Now, this next statement might be a bit controversial, but at least on a mechanical and system level, many of these lesser-known MOBAs are basically copying League of Legends and their style of gameplay. In other words, League of Legends serves as the blueprint that all future new MOBAs seem to follow. And in my opinion, any MOBA that follows in League of Legends' footsteps is more or less destined for obscurity or just straight up failure. It's a type of blueprint that can only work once, and anyone else who copies it just doesn't do it that well. Again, this is just me being a nitpicky Dota fanboy, but anytime that I see a new MOBA, they always do something of the following. They have bush mechanics, characters that you have to grind to unlock, despite the fact that counterpicking and hard countering other characters is a core philosophy of any MOBA. These games almost always have a base recall mechanic that all operate the same. You take damage, the teleport is interrupted. All of these games have jungle buffs, every single one of them, and they're always color-coded. Flash, every single MOBA other than Dota, has a flash mechanic. It's a spell that you can equip at the beginning of the match that gives you like a small bump in mobility and usually has a gigantic cooldown. Dota seems to be the only MOBA that doesn't really adhere to these things, because honestly, if another MOBA tried to copy Dota, they just couldn't. It's impossible. Dota has 2 decades of mechanics that have been built on top of one another, and all of them have been continuously refined and improved upon. And for a new MOBA to come out and attempt to have this level of depth and complexity is next to impossible. Most smaller companies couldn't even dream of making any meaningful headway in the MOBA genre. It's just too saturated. So essentially what you have here are the 2 big MOBAs, League of Legends and Dota. On the League of Legends side, you have almost every other MOBA in existence trying to emulate and follow what it did, but all of them end up living in its shadow. And on the other hand, you have Dota, which is so incredibly complex that it's almost impossible for any new MOBA to try to emulate its level of complexity. So what do you do if you want to make a new MOBA that makes a big enough impact in order to stand out from these 2? Well, you could adopt the mechanics that make the depth of Dota good, while also applying things that can make the game a lot more accessible and easier to understand, such as adding an extra genre into the mix, a hero shooter. Simply put, take the complexity of Dota, shave off the rough edges, and sugarcoat it with a bit of that hero shooter magic. Enter Deadlock, Valve's newest MOBA hero shooter hybrid. Deadlock is primarily led by the mango-loving developer known as IceFrog, who has been in charge of Dota for almost 20 years now. And as you know, Dota is a very successful game. It's made Gaben a ton of money.
Oh my goodness!
So it's safe to say that IceFrog probably has a lot of sway within the Valve company. I mean, under his leadership, Dota 2 became a huge esports titan. And it was so with all of this accrued influence and goodwill within Valve that IceFrog was able to make a brand new MOBA. The one MOBA that he has apparently always wanted to make. And that game is Deadlock. And just as a quick side note, I just wanted to say how astounding Deadlock's boom of popularity was. This game had everything going against it. I mean, people were hearing rumors about it from 2023 to 2024. And in the year 2024, people didn't want another hero shooter. They didn't want another MOBA. Valve fans specifically were unhappy due to the fact that Deadlock was seen as competition to Team Fortress 2. You also have to remember that the Fix TF2 movement was happening roughly at the same time. Or the mere fact that when they hear that Valve is making a new game, and this new game isn't Half-Life 3, people are going to be angry at that. So Deadlock had a lot of things that were supposed to hinder it right off rip, and despite that, it still exploded in popularity. Valve better give whoever was in charge of handling the PR of this game a fat raise. It is astounding how the marketing, presentation, and overall hype of this game was built up so naturally, so organically. But enough of that, let's get back to the topic. So, in what ways exactly does Deadlock owe its existence to Dota? Well, the reasons are numerous, both on a surface level and on a deeper level. First off, I'm going to list as many similarities and improvements that Deadlock has over Dota. Items and the character abilities are the easiest to compare. One-to-one character comparisons such as, for example, the Deadlock character Dynamo versus the Dota 2 character Enigma.
Opening black hole!
Another one is Paradox and Vengeful Spirit.
Where are you going?
And finally, the last one can be Bebop versus Pudge. But all of that is just surface level stuff. Once you really start to dive into the particulars and the deeper mechanics at play here, you'll realize that just because they kind of look similar doesn't mean that they're exactly one-to-one copies. For example, the Deadlock hero Bebop, despite having the hook ability just like Pudge from Dota, Bebop doesn't really play like him at all. Bebop isn't a tank, whereas Pudge is. Pudge is also meant to have a lot of lockdown and crowd control abilities. Bebop has none of these things. In fact, Bebop is all about dealing damage. Fellow MOBA YouTuber AceX2Ron actually has an excellent video talking about what makes Pudge so different compared to other hook-style characters in other MOBAs. Link in the video description below. It's a great channel, highly would recommend. Other more one-to-one comparisons, especially when it comes to the items in the game, can be made, such as the item in Deadlock called Unstoppable is literally the Black King bar from Dota, both providing basically the same effect. Another one can be Monster Rounds and Quelling Blade. Whereas on the surface, these two items don't do the same thing, if at all. The general purpose and overall reason for the item to exist is the same. One aspect Deadlock improved over Dota was simplifying the item builds in the game. In Dota, certain items need you to buy a ton of items and prerequisites. Take the Pipe of Insight, for example, the go-to item for magic resistance in Dota, or spirit resistance in Deadlock's case. To buy this item requires you to buy all of this stuff. It's like 2 layers of item progression just to buy this item. It's needlessly complex, and another thing that makes it worse is the fact that you can't buy this in the normal shop. You need to leave your base in Dota to buy it at the secret shop. This is an item shop that is located outside of your base. So in other words, to buy this one item, you need to combine 2 item build trees, and one of the items required to finish it, it's not even in the store. You have to buy it at another store. Try explaining all of this to a newbie. It's like needlessly complex. Whereas in Deadlock, if you wanted spirit resistance, you just buy Spirit Shield, and if you want more, you can upgrade it one time for better stats. Another perfect example of something that needed to be simplified is how the tower aggression works in these games. Or the Guardian aggression, I guess. In Deadlock, all static base defense buildings, such as walkers and guardians, will always attack the closest enemy to them. They don't switch targets, they only attack the nearest enemy till either that enemy is dead or leaves their attack range. These defense structures do not prioritize heroes or troopers, they simply attack whatever is closest. Whereas in Dota, the tower mechanics is a little more complicated. There are so needlessly complex parameters for how the tower aggression works that it's next to impossible to explain this to a new player. I understand how Dota's tower aggression works, but that's because I have over 10 years of Dota under my belt, which is also where your mom is right now. Honestly, just take a good long look at this and try to understand why this is so unbelievably complicated. This was a system that very much needed to be changed, and I'm happy that they did it. The map is another somewhat unique aspect to Deadlock in comparison to Dota and honestly other MOBAs as a whole. There are 4 lanes now instead of the usual 3 that other MOBAs have, and easily the best and most notable thing about the map is the zip lines that serve as the main means of fast movement between the lanes and the base. While being a lot more novel and unique than your standard teleporting that other MOBAs use, there also seems to be a quality of life reason for the choice of zipline over teleporting, as teleporting in a third-person perspective can be rather disorienting. The Deadlock hero Mirage ran into this issue when he was first released, as players had a hard time of getting their bearings whenever Mirage teleported. His ultimate allows him to teleport to any ally on the map. They have remedied this issue somewhat, but I think it was a good call to make teleporting not the main way of getting around the map. But Deadlock still has teleporting mechanics, but rather than using them for teleporting to allied buildings and such, instead they only go to predetermined spots on the map, using these teleporter booths that both teams can use. These teleporter booths is almost one-to-one the same mechanic as the twin gates in Dota that was introduced in the New Frontiers update. And honestly, just having ziplines are really cool. Just seeing your character move around the map is really fun, honestly. Have you ever ziplined in real life? It's amazing, it's fun. So why not make it into a gameplay mechanic, right? Another notable mechanic is the ability to deny money from your opponents. Honestly, this whole deny thing is the best and most surefire way to know that Ice Frog was behind this game. Essentially, in Dota, whenever an allied minion or creep is below half health, you can kill them to deny the enemy the experience and gold of said minion. And in Deadlock, whenever an allied trooper dies, you can shoot out the soul, therefore denying your opponent that money. The particulars of these two denying mechanics is a little different, but essentially they achieve the same thing. And as a side note, I have a few friends who play Deadlock, and they all say that the sound of the soul being denied is one of the most PTSD-inducing sounds they have ever heard. Might I suggest adding character-specific voice lines from the heroes to really mock whenever they get a deny? Just kind of like they do in Dota, for example.
Denied.
I deny you. Masterfully denied!
Denied!
I won't give them the satisfaction.
Face it, you're a loser.
There's also the fact that there's no surrender mechanic in this game. Yeah, Ice Frog doesn't like people giving up. Fog of War? Yeah, that's been replaced. It's now just line of sight. Of course, there are things that are wholly original that come with the new perspective changes. Basic aim and accuracy is a lot more important since it's the skill that you really need to practice and hone if you want to get better at these games. In Deadlock, you can't really get away with relying on point-and-click abilities like you do in Dota. This is another way of saying, yes, I do not play skill shot heroes in Dota. Really? How could you tell? The ability to dash jump is a rather simple mechanic on the surface that actually elevates the player's ability to showcase their skill expression. It's such a simple and small thing that on paper you think, why would I need to learn this mechanic? But honestly, it's just really satisfying to learn. Even out of game stuff such as the ability to seamlessly make and browse hero guides is something straight out of the Dota shop or guide menu. Hell, back when the game was still in its development and still went by the name of Neon Prime and had the whole sci-fi look, in the development screenshots and videos that we have seen of this game during this stage of development, the game was using Dota 2 heroes as stand-ins for their unfinished characters. And honestly, a huge benefit of Deadlock is, despite the fact of it being tangentially associated to both MOBAs and hero shooters like Overwatch, Deadlock was more or less able to carve out a niche for itself nicely between these two game genres. And if Deadlock's development continues to improve all the way up to its full release, I can see Deadlock serving as the new blueprint of a new hybrid subgenre of games. I'm very excited for this game's future. Deadlock is in good hands, because other than Valve and IceFrog, it has been confirmed that the guys behind Risk of Rain are officially on the Deadlock development team. In fact, a lot of character abilities from Risk of Rain are kinda in this game already, I swear. Shiv's knives sound almost exactly the same like Bandit from Risk of Rain too. And while I know that Deadlock will continue to get a lot of development as time goes on, Dota is still getting a good amount of updates and patches. In fact, rather recently, they just released a new hero, Kez, and honestly, he's one of the most unique and complex new additions to the game that I have seen in a long time. So in other words, Dota and Deadlock hand in hand can look forward to having a bright future ahead of them. Sure, you might say that Deadlock is Dota 3, but that doesn't mean that Dota is going anywhere. It's still here to stay. And honestly, that's just the best thing that we can ask for. And above everything else, the best similarities that these games have is that they both love frogs. There's a lot of frogs in this game. It's a little weird, like, what's up with that? I guess they just really like IceFrog.